Hello, this is Starry here, and welcome back to another movie review. This week I'll be doing High School Musical. This was released in 2006, directed by Sidney Lumet, stars Zac Efron, Vanessa Hudgens, Ashley Tisdale, and many more. The plot of this movie is that Troy and Gabriella want to audition for the school musical, but by doing so, they're breaking the status quo and basically causing havoc within their school. I'm gonna address this right now, right here, is that why I'm choosing this specific movie for this week. I usually do very blockbuster, very famous movies, so it might seem a bit weird why High School Musical was chosen for today. And the reason for that is I just wanted to have a chill movie, a movie where I didn't want to put too much brain power, and a movie that's a bit not that well known. So that's why I came with this one. Another reason also being is that this movie has been referenced to the moon and back. Almost every high school teacher I know has pretty much talked about it and said how this is unrealistic and whatnot. So I guess that built a little bit of anticipation to see what exactly all these people are talking about and why exactly this was so popular when it first came out. And long story short, if you want my opinion right now, is that this movie is definitely very cringe and very cheesy. You can definitely feel that considering it's a Disney Channel movie, but I still somehow enjoyed my experience watching it, which was I'm also surprised in myself too. But yeah, I still enjoyed it, and I feel like some of you might enjoy that as well. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into this story. The first thing I noticed is that this movie is way too extra and just way too cheesy. I feel like this movie would have been better off if it took itself a bit more seriously, considering its foundation for its story and characters is actually pretty solid. It just failed on the execution part, honestly, so if they had fixed that, it would have been better. I also think that the story is a bit predictable, and I mean, that's a given. It's a Disney Channel movie about romance in high school, but still, I would have wished that they would have at least varied things up a bit, made it a bit more unique and slightly less cliched. The one thing I did like about this movie is that I really liked its themes of stereotypes and how we have to break free of the status quo. I think that's a cool message to send, especially for its target demographic, which is like middle school, high schoolers, and telling them that they don't need to fit into these stereotypes, which is very much commonplace. So I feel like, yeah, that's just a good message, and they've done that overall pretty well. I also think that the start of this movie is pretty bad, honestly. It's also quite convenient. It's like they had no idea how to kickstart the romance between Troy and Gabriella, so they just made them go up on a stage and start singing a very, very convenient song. So I really would have wished they had thought of a much smarter way to begin the movie and begin the character romance. This movie also has no epilogue towards the end. Like, as soon as the final climax happens, it feels like the movie just ends there after the final song. I would have wished a little more closure between like the coach and Troy, and just overall a bit more after time for us to like cool down after the climax before we had our final song and whatnot. So that's that. I also think this movie is unintentionally funny, mostly because it's very cringe, like I mentioned, but I just kept laughing and laughing, and yeah, it's just because of the weird acting and whatnot. So I don't know if that's a pro or a con. I'll just leave that there as it is. But and my final point I would like to make is that yeah, it's still enjoyable. I still find like I think that the musical performances definitely helped, and it being a musical actually helps. So I guess as a musical, this movie definitely succeeds. But as a movie story-wise, not so much. Anyways, with that done, let's move on to our character section. Our main character, Troy. I feel like his arc was actually done pretty well about, like I mentioned, him breaking free of stereotypes and his basketball team and him being like, a jock or whatever. So I definitely liked his whole story arc. Which is surprising. I went into the movie thinking that he would have had nothing to work with, but at least they gave Zac Efron something. On the other hand, our second main lead, Gabriella, I felt like her arc was actually underwhelming. Mostly because I feel like her arc was pushed aside, and that being like her anxiety and her like whatever the math contest that she went to. But I wish that they put a little bit more front focus on that side of the story too, and not instead of just focusing mainly on Troy. I also think that the antagonists of this movie, Sharpay especially, are pretty cringe and pretty unrealistic too. They also have no sort of character arc. They don't really develop throughout the movie. And hey, before you tell me that towards the end they suddenly turn good is character development, that is way too unrealistic to be character development. But I will give the boy side. Who was her twin, Sharpay's twin brother? I forgot his name, but he was pretty funny at least. So I guess I like his side of the antagonist role. Aside from that, I think the side characters arc was pretty rushed, especially like the friends of both Troy and Gabriella, and the coach and the other who was the teacher, the musical, the lady who was very extra. But I feel like their arc was also pretty rushed. And if you were to ask me, I would have probably not included an arc for them, and the movie should have just been about these people not caring about the stereotypes and the thoughts of others. I feel like that would have been much better and would have made the movie a bit more compact, and then you have a bit more room to play with in the sequels regarding the arcs of the friends. So that's that. And the one thing I do have to mention here for characters is that they have a major casting problem. This movie is supposed to take place in high school, right? And these guys are casting like supermodels to play these high schoolers, so it definitely took me out of the experience a bit, and I really would have wished they actually cast, normal high schoolers. But aside from that, the one positive thing that I can give the characters category is that the romantic chemistry between Troy and Gabriella was pretty good. You can definitely tell it was good, and that's mainly in part to like the actor's role, and they actually did convey these characters pretty well, so there's that. Anyways, I think that's it with the characters portion. Consider subscribing if you've made it this far, but let's get on to the next portion, which is cinematography. So the cinematography in this movie is honestly just quite basic and uncreative. There was nothing really memorable about it, and there were no iconic shots either, which I would have expected there to be considering how popular this movie is, but none of the shots really stuck with me towards the end. And in fact, there's quite a few bad shots in this movie, and that mostly pertains to dialogue scenes. When two characters are talking to each other, it feels like the camera is cutting way too much back and forth, and I guess that's more of an editing problem, but still I'll credit that for cinematography. But yeah, I really would have wished they had taken a bit more time and thought about how they would do the camera work for dialogue scenes, and it would have made it a bit more nicer, and just made the overall experience a little bit better as well. I will say though, the cinematography did in fact capture the musical performances quite well, which could be a little hard to do considering that you're switching from like a very introspective, like close-up sort of tone to a larger grand tone where you have to capture a lot of things at once and a lot of movement. So yeah, they definitely did that well, and it definitely made the musical performances feel a lot more grand. And yeah. Anyways, that's it with cinematography. I know it's quite short, and this review might be quite short, honestly. But let's move on to soundtrack. Soundtrack might be the strongest thing this movie has going for it. I like the songs really well. I feel like you can go back and listen to them. They have a very they're very catchy is what I'll say, and they're also very memorable. I feel like if you showed me a High School Musical song like 2 years from now, I'd probably remember it. I think my most favorite probably has to be the bop 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 to the top, that one. Even though that's the villain song, it was super catchy, I feel like. And this was quite surprising considering I didn't really expect their soundtrack to be that good, but hey, you do good where you do good. Not only were the songs good, but also musical scenes and the way the songs were implemented into the movie were also played really well. And I also really like the fact that the musical scenes actually played into the story and actually advanced the plot of the story, instead of just being like a break or an intermission for us to just, take a break from what's going on. So I really like that portion of it too. So yeah, like I mentioned before, this movie works really well as a musical, but as a sort of a movie, not so much. And speaking of negative things, I think that the background music was a bit bland. I feel like they could have done a bit more work, because it definitely feels like they just went to their Disney Channel music library and chose whatever background music they've had for how many years and just plugged it into this movie. So I really would have wished a bit more creativity on that front. Anyways, I think that's it with soundtrack. Like I said, the best part of this movie, so let's get on to my overall thoughts. Starting off with the pros of this movie. The first pro is that the themes of stereotypes are done well. This movie is also quite enjoyable. I really like the arc of Troy and the romantic chemistry between the two main leads. I think the cinematography was really good for the songs. I love the songs just being honestly good, memorable, and being implemented well into the scenes. That's it with my pros. Let's move on to my cons now. I feel like this movie is really extra and really cheesy. The plot is also super predictable, and the start of this movie is pretty poor, as well as the movie missing an epilogue towards the end. Gabriella's arc is also underwhelming. The antagonists were cringe, as well as them not really having an arc, and the other characters, like the side characters, also didn't have a very good fleshed out arcs, as well as there being a casting problem where they just kept casting supermodels for every single role. In terms of cinematography, I feel like it was just too basic, the camera work, and uncreative. There were no really iconic shots, and in fact some of the shots were just bad. For soundtrack wise, the only problem I would have is that the background music's just a bit too bland, and they could have been a bit more creative with that. And that leads me to my final score, which is going to be a 3 out of 10 stars. And the reason, with no other words to give, by the way, and the reason I'm giving it 3 and not like a 2 is because although the cons pretty heavily outweigh the pros in my opinion, I feel like the enjoyment factor and everything else kind of elevates it up from that very bad category. And the reason I can't give it a 4 is because a 4 means just like, slightly below average, but like I said, the cons pretty heavily outweigh the pros, so that's why I feel like it lands at a perfect 3. And yeah, let me know what you think about this movie, and if you agree with my take. And I'm gonna mention this here once again for the third time, is that I feel like as a musical, this movie does it really well, but as a movie, it definitely needs a lot of improvement. And I think I'll be signing off for this video now, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.